Can a dopamine detox really rewire your mind and stop the mental noise? You don't actually want what you think you want. You tell yourself you want to focus, to feel motivated, to think clearly again. But the truth is, you don't actually want clarity, not in the way your brain is wired right now. What you really want is relief. Relief from pressure, from discomfort, from that low, persistent noise inside your head that never fully shuts off. So you reach for your phone, you scroll, you tap, you move, not because you're lazy, not because you're addicted to your phone, but because the part of your brain that once craved progress now craves escape. And no one ever taught you to notice the difference. You think you're choosing distraction, but what you're actually choosing over and over is a burst of dopamine, that invisible neurochemical that promises, this will feel better than sitting still. This will feel better than trying. This will feel better than doing nothing and letting your thoughts catch up with you. But here's what no one told you. Dopamine itself isn't the problem. Distraction isn't the problem. Your phone, your habits, your lack of motivation, none of these are the root. They're all symptoms of a system that's been rewired by overstimulation. You didn't decide to live this way. Your brain was trained into it. Every swipe, every scroll, every tab switch, it's part of a loop. A loop your nervous system now mistakes for survival. And it's exhausting you quietly. You feel it in the way you wake up already tired, in the way your mind jumps before it thinks, in the way you can't tell the difference between boredom and burnout anymore. And that's where this conversation starts, not with blame, not with shame, but with a single question. Can a dopamine detox actually rewire your mind and stop the noise that's been running in the background of your life for years? We're not talking about quitting technology or punishing yourself with a week in silence. We're talking about learning how your brain actually works. We're talking about patterns you've never seen and the power to change them without moralizing your behavior or forcing discipline that doesn't stick. This video is not about going backward. It's about taking back control of your inner environment so your attention becomes yours again. So your thoughts are no longer hijacked by default behaviors. So you can finally see where your mind ends and the noise begins. Because once you see the loop, you can break it. And once you break it, everything changes. Not instantly, but permanently. Let's start with the truth that almost no one is saying out loud. You're not broken. You're just overstimulated. You're not broken. You're just overstimulated. If your thoughts feel scattered, your focus feels fragile, and your motivation feels like it's gone missing, the story you've probably been told is that you are the problem. That maybe you're just not disciplined enough, not organized enough, not wired for consistency. But none of that is true. You're not broken. You're overstimulated. And there's a massive difference. The modern brain, your brain, is being hit with more inputs per hour than previous generations absorbed in a week. Dopamine spikes from notifications, micro hits from short-form content, rapid task switching that keeps your mind on edge, never quite landing, never quite resting. You're not failing to focus. You're operating in a state that makes focus neurologically expensive. Dopamine isn't just a pleasure chemical. It's a driver of attention, motivation, and anticipation. And when it's constantly spiking from low-effort, high-stimulation inputs, your brain adapts. It rewires itself to expect constant novelty, instant gratification, zero friction, which makes stillness feel unbearable, effort feel unrewarding, and depth feel out of reach. This is why you can't just try harder and expect it to stick. Willpower doesn't fix a miscalibrated reward system. You can't white-knuckle your way through a loop your nervous system thinks is normal. And yet, this is where most people give up, thinking the problem is personal, when it's actually systemic. Your brain is doing exactly what it was trained to do. Chase quick rewards. Avoid emotional friction. Stay stimulated at all costs. The real issue is that this system, which once helped you cope, stay busy, feel connected, is now turning against you. What once gave relief now creates noise. What once felt like control now feels like chaos. But here's the shift. The moment you stop blaming yourself, you regain leverage. The moment you realize this isn't about weakness, but about overstimulation, you stop shaming your behavior and start understanding it. This understanding is the first step to rewiring the loop, not by cutting everything out, but by becoming conscious of what your brain has been trained to crave. You don't need to be more disciplined. You need a clearer environment, a different rhythm, a new baseline. Because when your inputs change, your internal state follows. And when your internal state changes, focus, clarity, and motivation stop feeling like things you have to chase and start becoming things you return to. You're not defective. You're not lazy. You're not lost. You're overstimulated, and now you see it. When distraction becomes a coping mechanism, distraction isn't random. It's not just a bad habit or a side effect of too many devices. It's a coping strategy, one your nervous system learned over time to help you avoid discomfort you never learned to process. When you scroll without thinking, when you check your phone for the 10th time in 5 minutes, when you open 5 tabs just to close them again, you're not seeking information. You're seeking relief, not from boredom, but from something deeper, emotional tension. Sometimes it's subtle, a quiet unease, an unfinished thought, a conversation you've been avoiding with yourself. Other times it's loud, fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, fear of doing something difficult, and not knowing if you'll succeed. Whatever the shape of it, your brain has learned to soothe it by shifting attention away from the discomfort and towards stimulation. And here's where the loop gets dangerous. The relief you get from distraction is real, but it's temporary. It works in the short term by helping you regulate emotion. But over time, it erodes your capacity to face challenge, to stay with discomfort, to build true clarity. This is why so many people feel stuck. It's not that they're lazy. It's that every time emotional friction appears, whether it's boredom, insecurity, or uncertainty, their reflex is to escape. Not because they want to, but because their brain now equates focus with tension and tension with danger. And this didn't happen overnight. This is behavioral conditioning, reinforced by repetition, by technology, by unchecked emotional avoidance. You've trained your attention to serve as a shield, not a tool. And distraction became the armor that protected you from having to feel what was actually under the surface. The problem is that this armor doesn't just protect you from pain. It also blocks depth, engagement, momentum. It stops you from experiencing what actually matters, the hard but meaningful process of showing up fully, even when things feel uncertain. But the good news is this: distraction is a loop, not a life sentence. And like any loop, it can be interrupted. The next time you feel the impulse to escape, notice what it's protecting you from. That moment of awareness isn't small. It's a break in the pattern, a place where choice becomes possible again. Your goal isn't to eliminate all distraction. It's to understand the role it's been playing and to give your mind a better strategy than escape. Dopamine is not the enemy. Confusion about it is, dopamine gets a lot of blame. It's become the catch-all villain for distraction, addiction, low motivation, even procrastination. But most people don't actually understand what dopamine is, and that confusion is part of the problem. Dopamine is not a pleasure chemical. It's a motivation chemical. It doesn't make you feel satisfied. It makes you pursue, anticipate, want. It's what drives you toward a goal, and what keeps your brain locked into patterns of do this gives, feel better. Every behavior you repeat, whether it's checking your phone, going for a run, binge watching, or building something meaningful, is reinforced by dopamine. Not because the activity is inherently good or bad, but because your brain links that action to a predicted reward. This is why scrolling feels easy. It offers a fast, low-effort dopamine loop, minimal friction, rapid novelty, immediate feedback. And it's also why focused work, reading, or deep reflection often feel harder. They offer delayed rewards with no quick spike to keep you chasing. When people talk about doing a dopamine detox, they often think they need to remove all sources of stimulation. But that's not how your brain works. You can't remove dopamine. You can't eliminate the need for reward. What you can do is reset the kind of rewards your brain is wired to expect. That shift matters. Because if you try to cut out stimulation without replacing it with something meaningful, something effort-based, something that builds, your brain will resist. It will panic. And eventually, it will retreat back to the loop it knows. Understanding this is critical. Dopamine is not your enemy. Misusing it is. Misunderstanding it is. Building a life around only short-term spikes is what keeps you exhausted, distracted, and emotionally flat. But when you shift your baseline, when you teach your brain to anticipate reward from things that require presence, effort, patience, you reclaim your attention. You start to rewire not just how you act, but what you value. This isn't about quitting pleasure. It's about reconnecting to a different kind of satisfaction. One that lasts. One that strengthens you. One that doesn't collapse the moment you're bored or uncomfortable. The goal is not to fear dopamine, it's to understand it well enough that you can stop being unconsciously controlled by it. Mental clarity requires a baseline, not a break. Clarity isn't something that returns just because you unplug for a few hours. You can take a break, delete your apps, turn your phone off, even escape to the mountains, and still feel mentally cluttered, restless, and pulled in 1,000 directions. Because clarity doesn't come from absence. It comes from baseline. Your brain doesn't reset automatically when you stop the inputs. It recalibrates based on what it consistently receives. That means if your daily rhythm is dominated by fragmented tasks, reactive behaviors, and micro rewards, even stepping away won't undo the loop, it'll just pause it. This is why short digital detoxes rarely lead to lasting change. They give temporary relief, but not neurological recovery. The brain craves predictability. It tracks patterns, not events. So a single break, even a full weekend offline, doesn't rewire anything unless it's part of a longer, intentional shift in baseline. What is a baseline? It's your default. The emotional and cognitive environment your nervous system expects when nothing unusual is happening. If that baseline is noisy, reactive, overstimulated, then calm will feel unnatural, boring, even unsafe. But if you change what your brain expects, through rhythm, through constraint, through intentional input, then calm starts to feel normal again. Focus becomes familiar. Noise loses its grip. Cal Newport's work on deep work explains this through the concept of cognitive residue. Every time you switch tasks, your brain leaves a part of itself behind in the previous one. That leftover tension builds. And over time, it clouds your mental field, like tabs left open in your mind that never fully close. You don't feel it in the moment, but you live inside its fog. You can't meditate your way out of a scattered baseline. You have to rebuild it from the ground up, not by removing everything, but by consistently reintroducing depth. Depth doesn't have to be rigid or extreme. It just has to be repeatable, focused blocks of work. One screen at a time. Space between tasks. Movement without stimulation, low input mornings. These aren't productivity hacks, they're neural scaffolding. The goal isn't to escape mental noise for a day. It's to create a nervous system that no longer defaults to it. That's how clarity becomes your new baseline, not something you earn, just something you return to. The silent cost of microdopamine hits. You probably don't even notice it anymore. The quick swipe while waiting for a tab to load. The glance at your phone between thoughts. The habit of checking messages you already know haven't changed. These are microdopamine hits, small, frequent bursts of stimulation that seem harmless, but leave a cognitive debt you're barely aware you're carrying. Each time you check for something, a notification, an update, a reaction, your brain releases a small spike of dopamine. Not because something meaningful happened, but because your nervous system has been trained to expect novelty. A tiny burst of reward in exchange for almost no effort. And while one hit might seem insignificant, the real cost comes from accumulation. Like background noise that's always running, these micro-hits gradually chip away at your ability to stay with anything. They fragment attention. They weaken memory consolidation. They flatten motivation. It's not the intensity of the stimulus that rewires your brain. It's the frequency, the pattern, the repetition of low-effort rewards that teach your brain to chase stimulation instead of depth. So when you try to sit down and focus, the silence feels wrong. The effort feels unrewarding. Your brain starts scanning for something easier, faster, more familiar. This is how distraction becomes your default. Not because you're lazy, but because your reward system has been hijacked by tiny, constant inputs that never give your brain time to reset. You live in a state of perpetual anticipation, without the satisfaction of completion. Even worse, these micro-hits condition your brain to expect immediate feedback. So anything that requires patience, ambiguity, or sustained effort begins to feel pointless. Not because it is, but because your nervous system no longer recognizes it as rewarding. This is where most people get stuck. They want clarity, but they're living in a loop that erodes it one ping at a time. They want to feel motivated, but they're flooding their brain with novelty that undercuts the very systems responsible for motivation. The way out isn't about removing all stimulation. It's about becoming conscious of when and why you're reaching for it. It's about creating space between impulse and action. Not to punish yourself, but to retrain your mind to feel reward in longer arcs, not just tiny spikes. You don't need a digital fast to reset this. You need awareness, intention, friction that's just uncomfortable enough to help your nervous system remember what stillness feels like. Because without that stillness, your brain never rests. It only reacts. You've trained your brain to expect instant rewards. Your nervous system is always learning. Every time you choose one action over another, you're reinforcing a rule, not just about what to do, but about what to expect. And if your daily rhythm is built around rapid, low-effort rewards, your brain adapts by narrowing its tolerance for anything that feels slow, uncertain, or emotionally demanding. You didn't choose to build this pattern. You inherited it from the tools you use, the pace of your environment, the way modern life rewards urgency over depth. But now it's embedded, not just in your habits, but in your neurochemistry. Instant rewards condition your brain to devalue anything that doesn't pay off immediately. Not just in productivity, but in everything: relationships, creative work, physical health, emotional healing. The things that matter most take time. But your brain, trained on instant loops, loses interest the moment progress isn't visible. This is what creates the quiet frustration that so many people carry. Not because they lack ambition, but because their system has been rewired to crave resolution before effort, certainty before risk, gratification before growth. This isn't a motivation issue, it's a prediction error. Your brain expects effort to feel good immediately, and when it doesn't, it assumes something is wrong, so it pulls away, switches tasks, reaches for something that feels productive but is actually just reactive. The name for this is dopamine conditioning. A loop where the only behaviors that feel emotionally safe are the ones that produce fast feedback. And the danger is, the more you feed this loop, the less resilient your attention becomes. You don't just lose focus, you lose your capacity to stay with anything that requires delayed reward. But this isn't fixed. The brain is plastic. It rewired into this loop, and it can rewire out, not through willpower, not through punishment, but through new expectations repeated with consistency. Start small. Introduce tasks that require effort without payoff. Stay with them. Let the discomfort surface. Don't escape it. Don't rush through it. Teach your brain, through direct experience, that effort without instant reward is still worth something. That's the reset. Not a detox from dopamine, but a shift in how you assign value. The more you honor the long game, the more your nervous system will follow. And when it does, motivation stops being something you chase. It becomes something that meets you where you are: quiet, steady, earned. Why willpower fails when the system is wired against you? Most people blame themselves when they can't focus, when they keep falling back into the same distractions, when the motivation they felt yesterday disappears by the afternoon. And the story they reach for, because it's the one they've always been told, is "I just need more willpower." But willpower was never designed to carry the weight of a broken system. Your nervous system isn't failing because you're weak. It's failing because the environment you live in, the inputs you receive, the rhythms you follow, the rewards your brain expects, is fundamentally misaligned with what sustained attention requires. Willpower is a conscious override, a temporary push against an automatic process. It works briefly when the system is stable. When your body is rested, your emotions are regulated, your baseline is clear. But when you're overstimulated, underslept, emotionally overloaded, and neurologically trained to chase novelty, willpower collapses. Not because it's useless, but because it was never meant to be your only strategy. Think of your attention like a muscle. If the structure around it is solid, habits, sleep, focus blocks, aligned goals, then you don't need to constantly force effort. It flows. But if the structure is chaotic, if you're constantly bombarded with inputs, decisions, noise, then every moment becomes a test of restraint, and no one can sustain that indefinitely. This is where guilt creeps in. You tell yourself you should be better. You should just push through. But guilt doesn't rebuild systems, it just deepens the loop. It keeps you locked in a pattern of failure, followed by shame, followed by another attempt at willpower, followed by the same result. The shift happens when you stop asking, "Why can't I force myself to focus?" and start asking, "What environment would make focus feel natural again?" That question puts you in control. It moves the conversation from internal blame to external design. Because when the system supports the behavior, effort becomes lighter. You still have to show up, but it no longer feels like a battle against yourself. Instead of white-knuckling your way through noise, start subtracting what creates the noise in the first place. One layer at a time. Notifications, cluttered tabs, endless task switching, emotional avoidance. The goal is not to eliminate all friction. It's to remove the friction that doesn't matter, so you can focus on the friction that does. You don't need more willpower. You need a system that doesn't demand it all the time. Rewiring starts with meaningful friction. The kind of discipline that works isn't rooted in punishment. It doesn't come from forcing yourself through tasks you secretly resent. Real rewiring starts when you stop trying to eliminate friction and start choosing friction that actually means something. Every meaningful behavior, building focus, breaking a habit, shifting your baseline, involves discomfort. But not all discomfort is the same. There's the kind that drains you because it's disconnected from purpose. And there's the kind that strengthens you because it's aligned with something you value. Most people avoid both. They confuse all friction with failure. So when they hit a moment of resistance, boredom, difficulty, silence, they retreat. They reach for a screen, a shortcut, an excuse. Not because they want to quit, but because their nervous system associates discomfort with danger, not growth. Julie Smith talks about this as emotional conditioning, how the brain learns to interpret discomfort as a threat rather than a signal. But what if discomfort isn't a red flag? What if it's a door? Choosing meaningful friction is how you retrain that interpretation. It's how you teach your system, this tension isn't hurting me, it's reshaping me. Slowly, yes, but deeply. That kind of friction might look like a block of focused work without multitasking. A workout you don't want to do but finish anyway. A conversation you've been avoiding. A piece of writing you push through, not for perfection, but for presence. The moment you engage with that discomfort on purpose, without escape, the loop begins to shift. Cal Newport calls this the deep life, a life organized around clarity, depth, and intention. But that life doesn't start with big changes. It starts with small acts of deliberate resistance, moments where you face friction and decide not to back down. The point isn't to eliminate pleasure. It's to recalibrate your reward system so that depth starts to feel more natural than distraction. So that your nervous system remembers how to stay with something long enough to experience the kind of reward that doesn't vanish after a dopamine spike. That's where rewiring begins. Not in removing all difficulty, but in moving toward the kind of difficulty that builds identity, not avoidance. You don't need more motivation. You need moments of intentional discomfort that remind your system what it's capable of. The dopamine reset, a human rational alternative to digital fasts. You don't need to disappear for 7 days. You don't need to throw your phone in a drawer, delete every app, or romanticize a silent retreat. The dopamine reset that actually works isn't extreme. It's consistent, rational, and built for real life. The problem with most dopamine detox advice is that it treats stimulation like a toxin you can flush out in one go. But dopamine isn't something you can remove. It's a core part of how your brain functions. The goal isn't absence, it's recalibration. This reset isn't about punishment. It's about creating a pattern your nervous system can trust, one that reteaches your brain how to experience reward without requiring constant novelty or escape. It starts with constraint. Choose small windows during your day where inputs are limited on purpose. Not forever, just enough to show your system what presence actually feels like again. A 30-minute deep work block without switching tasks. A walk without headphones. A single tab open when you write. These aren't hacks. They're retraining tools. Next is replacement. If you remove quick dopamine hits without introducing effort-based rewards, your brain panics. So give it something better to chase. Projects that require focus. Tasks that build progress, not just completion. Stretch goals that feel real, not performative. Your brain will resist at first. That's part of the reset. Then comes tracking. Not in the obsessive, quantified self-sense. Just simple awareness. When do I reach for stimulation? What am I trying to avoid? You're not measuring performance. You're building pattern recognition. The more clearly you see the loop, the easier it is to step outside it. This isn't about self-denial. It's about self-direction. You're not cutting off pleasure. You're upgrading the kind of pleasure your brain is wired to expect. From quick validation to deep engagement. From noise to clarity. From escape to momentum. The most powerful dopamine reset isn't radical. It's repeatable. It works because it fits inside your actual life, not as a cleanse but as a new default. A rhythm your nervous system can return to without friction, guilt, or collapse. And over time, that rhythm stops feeling like a reset. It starts feeling like reality. Mental noise is not a life sentence. It's a signal you can decode. The noise inside your head, the racing thoughts, the pull to distract, the low-level tension that never seems to leave. It's not a personal flaw. It's not proof that something is wrong with you. It's a signal. One your nervous system has been sending for a long time. You just haven't been taught how to read it. Mental noise isn't random. It's your mind's way of alerting you to an internal system that's out of sync, overstimulated, underdirected, emotionally fragmented. The volume rises when clarity is missing, when your behaviors no longer align with what you actually value, when your environment rewards urgency but punishes depth. And the mistake most people make is trying to mute the noise without understanding it. They treat it like something to escape through distraction, avoidance, or endless optimization, instead of what it actually is, a call to realign. This entire journey from overstimulation to clarity isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming conscious. About recognizing that your brain isn't broken. It's just been reacting to a system it was never designed to thrive in. And now you have a choice. Continue reacting or start redesigning. What you've learned here isn't just information. It's a lens, one that lets you see your habits, your attention, your desires, with sharper focus. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You begin to understand why your focus collapsed when it did. Why motivation kept slipping through your fingers. Why the noise never truly stopped, even when you were resting. But now you know how to listen differently. That mental noise isn't your enemy, it's your feedback loop. It tells you when you're avoiding effort, when your inputs are outpacing your values, when you're chasing stimulation instead of meaning. And more importantly, it tells you when it's time to stop numbing and start choosing. You don't have to control every thought. You don't need to micromanage your dopamine. You just need to rebuild the space between stimulus and response. In that space is your power to pause, to choose, to act differently. Because once you learn to decode that signal, the noise stops being noise. It becomes clarity, direction, identity, not something outside you, but something rising from within, calm, steady, and finally, yours.